Well, Laura joins us now live from Seoul. Laura, good to see you. I mean, as you say, quite a different sort of election. What sort of turnout was there?
A record turnout, the highest turnout in a parliamentary election since 1992. So we're hearing it's about 66.2% of the 44 million eligible voters turned out. Now, as well as the measures you saw there, if you had a temperature that was over 37.5 degrees Celsius, you were moved to a separate polling booth. So they set up a separate voting area for those with a higher temperature. Also, when it came to those in quarantine, there are around 60,000 people currently in quarantine. Perhaps they've come into contact with an infected patient or they're here after returning from overseas. They too were allowed to vote, but only at a certain time, that last hour of polling. They were told to leave their homes at a certain time and be back. They had to call health authorities the minute that they returned home. These measures have taken an army of volunteers, 550,000 people around the country, to try to make sure that everything was in place. But so far, fingers crossed, everything seems to have gone quite smoothly.
Laura, there's been huge amount of praise for the way in which South Korea has handled this pandemic. Is this also now a test of how the public views President Moon?
Exactly. So these are parliamentary elections. It's 2 years before the next presidential election, but his ruling party is under scrutiny. And so far, and I have to put a big note of caution, we've had exit poll results. Sometimes these can be wrong, but so far it shows or suggests certainly that the ruling party could be on course for an historic win, one of the biggest wins that they've had. Obviously, the votes have still to be counted. And again, I just kind of urge caution with that. But it does seem that they have done rather well. And that may be because people feel that this pandemic has been brought under control. They've seen what's happened around the world. And when those case numbers were ramping up, at one point we're getting 900 cases a day. It's now down to under 20 a day. And I think as people have seen how it's been handled abroad and how it's all handled here, I think they're feeling certainly very thankful.
Laura, thanks so much for joining us and for that update.
Meanwhile, this has also been at the forefront globally, the whole issue of what South Korea has done. South Korea has done better than most of the other countries around the world in handling the pandemic. They are now sending 600,000 more COVID-19 test kits to the U.S. today. South Korea's widespread testing has allowed it to become the first country to hold a nationwide election during the pandemic, a possible blueprint for the U.S. in November. What lessons can the U.S. learn from South Korea's approach to the virus? NBC Korean Affairs analyst Victor Cha has some answers. Victor served on the National Security Council, leading all of our government efforts on North and South Korea for years. Victor, good to see you. Let's talk about this election, which apparently was held successfully. We've seen video of people going to the polls, getting their temperatures taken before they can vote. Everyone wearing masks, of course. What can we learn from South Korea and how effectively they broadly tested, and are beginning to reopen?
Well, I think you just said it there, Andrea. I mean, one of the things they did was they did widespread testing. So they've tested 2 to 3 more people per capita in South Korea than they have here in the United States. And they, as you mentioned in your piece, they have a surplus of masks and test kits that they're now exporting abroad because they've met all the domestic demand. And they never really had to lock down and shut down like we're doing now because they moved fairly early. Basically, right after the crisis, almost right after the crisis, they declared a national emergency about a month before the United States did. And then within 2 weeks of their first case, they discovered their first case within a day of the United States discovering their first case. Within 2 weeks, they were rolling test kits off the production line. And within 3 weeks, they were creating these phone apps for mobile contact tracing. So, they learned from previous mistakes. They had pandemics before where the government didn't respond well. And so they were quite prepared this time. And the results are clear.
Now, their phone apps are probably similar to what Apple and Google are talking about with phone-to-phone connections, but there are privacy concerns. You worked in the White House. Do you think that the U.S. would accept that and could properly protect against the privacy invasion that this could represent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Undeniably, these sort of locator apps do raise privacy issues. They raise privacy issues in the United States. There was one Trump official that said Korea can do this because they're not a democracy. But this is a country where the people actually impeached the last president of the country. So they're very much a democracy. But there are clearly our privacy concerns with something like this. But it's a trade-off. On the one hand, these mobile apps and this mobile tracing provides a public good so that we all feel safer and more comfortable going out of our homes if we were to reopen our economy. And that's the key. The objective is to reopen after the peak. And if we don't have universal testing, right, as Debbie Dingell just said, and we don't have a vaccine, which is 18 months to 2 years away, all we're left with is contact tracing and social distancing. And so what these phone apps do is they give us a better handle on being able to do that, even though it means a temporary incursion of our privacy.